If you were around in 1994 and had a Super Nintendo, Super Metroid was a pretty big deal for many a kid, including myself. GameCube, Wii's, and Metroid Primes later, along with the handheld Metroids like Fusion, we finally got a 2D console Metroid again on the Switch. Of course, I am talking about Metroid Dread. Having recently played through Metroid Dread a couple of times, once on Standard and once on the Rookie difficulty setting, and then having a nostalgic trip replaying Super Metroid, well, I thought, is one of these better than the other? On surface level, it wasn't as obvious as a choice as I thought it might be. Does newer automatically make it better? Or can you not top the original? Or the sequel to the original? Or Metroid 3? Overall, after I had finished both games, I definitely leaned toward one of them, but I wanted to take a deeper dive and look at some individual factors. So who is better, Super Metroid or Metroid Dread? Generations and technology advancements later. Some of the factors I'll be looking at here to pick a winner include graphics, music and sound, voiceover, play control, difficulty, level design, replay value, overall gameplay, presentation, weapons and moves, and boss design. So the first thing I'm going to look at here is music. Of course, some of these categories, such as music, is a very subjective thing. Some people like metal or classical, or both. Others like country or rap, etc., etc. Others appreciate it all, or you might want to sit in a rocking chair and not listen to anything. Each to their own. Other things like the graphics, I think, are a bit of a no-brainer as we're dealing with generations and technology advancements apart, but we'll still talk about all of that too. So bear in mind, this of course is all just a giant opinion piece, so whether you agree or disagree during this deep dive, I would love to hear what you think about it in the comments below. So without further ado, let's take a deep dive into who will come out on top, Super Metroid or Metroid Dread. Before we go on, just know that there will be major spoilers ahead if you have not played either game, so you might want to save this to your watch later if you haven't played either game. Unless you have no intention to doing so or whatever, then enjoy the video anyway, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video to support the channel. The first topic I'm going to dive into is the music, mainly so I can talk about it and hopefully avoid any copyright claims. Yay! Plus I am a musician also, so whatever, I like music. Let's begin with Super Metroid's music. In the space colony, you're introduced to Ridley very early on in the game, and the minor scale and few prominent notes stand out as ensuring you know you're fighting something evil. Of course, we won't see Ridley for a while, but when you do see him again close to the end of the game, he has the same brief reveal coming out of the shadows or cloak, and the same theme kicking in that has lasted literal console generations later. When you arrive on planet Zebes, it is very quiet aside from cracks of thunder and really sets the mood of this is a new planet and you don't really know what to expect. It's subtle and creates a great sense of suspense. Of course, this is early on in the game, and once you get a little deeper into Criteria, the music kicks in, which as a little kid when I first played this game, gave me the creeps and a very unsettling feeling, and probably a nightmare or two. It's almost Twilight Zone inspired with the backing notes, it's creepy and fitting for the environment with the introduction of the space pirates. Now on the planet's surface, after you've come out of Criteria, it's a bit interesting in that it has a more uplifting feel. Almost military-like, where I could picture military-style drums underneath the music. It invokes for me at least a feeling of, yeah, my ship as Samus is right here, and I could leave at any time I want, but I got a mission to do, so let's do this thing. Brinstar. Brinstar takes on a whole different shift from the sinister sound of Criteria and gets into a more funky style of track with some sharp opening synth notes and a groovy beat. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go through this area, find secret rooms, shoot up all the wonderful alien life, and make my way deeper into planet Zebes to find the Metroid larva that Ridley stole from the space station. Now that's the first part of Brinstar. Later on, we'll get closer to a section opening up into Meridia, where there's a very soft and eerie track that has light keys, like a light key piano melody, and you know something is coming, but you're not sure what lies ahead. For me, it inspires a feeling of awe of things to come. Now in Norfair, of course we are in a very hot section of the planet, with lava flowing in various parts of the map here before getting into the depths of Norfair later in the game, and taking on Ridley for real before Mother Brain. It's a subtle theme with some vocal chants that I never found super appealing personally, as opposed to the Norfair depths later on, but the enemies in the beginning of Norfair I never found super threatening, let alone the so-called boss Crocomire that you easily push back into the lava until his skin violently melts off and he gets dead. Now the Norfair depths with the tribal drumbeat, vocal chants is almost Indiana Jones-like to me. It inspires a feeling for me of, okay, I'm still adventuring, I'm super powered at this point, but at the same time, I'm in enemy territory and something big is lying in wait. A track that has lasted generations, and slight tangent, I loved the remastered track in the Magmore Caverns for those of you who have played Metroid Prime, and if you're watching this video, I'm willing to bet that's a good chunk of you. Okay, how about the boss music? There's a few different tracks, the Brinstar plant boss, the Spore Spawn, being, well, just kind of odd but maybe fitting for a plant boss. I could almost picture this being used in some Batman Poison Ivy type fight, but the other typical boss music is extremely sinister and screams of terror. Love it here. The Wrecked Ship. Yet another area that creeped me out as a kid, and I actually think I stopped playing the game back then because of it. Either that or I got stuck on the Phantoon boss or something, but in either case, it's a dark and eerie place before you get the power back on before defeating the phantom boss that haunts the ship. It's strange music and noise for a strange place, and I think it really works here. Now Meridia gets interesting as it once again has that sort of feel that the Brinstar 2 Meridia section has, but it gets even eerier and is entirely fitting for an underwater section. Without looking at the screen, it seems to work really well for, okay, you're on an alien planet now and you're going to see some interesting alien life in these murky waters, but be on guard because you don't know how these creatures will react to you. Will they scurry off onto their business, or will they be hostile and viciously attack you on sight? Watch your step. Now another section of Meridia gets a bit darker, and here it says, okay, no, really, now really watch your step. Finally, after beating Ridley in the depths of Norfair, we make our way into Turian, lair of Mother Brain. There's a sort of evil theme based on a variation of the elevator music, along with some gurgling sound effects that's just kind of on the gross side. Now Mother Brain. The Mother Brain music in Super Metroid is just downright terrifying, and I love it. Starting out with a chromatic ascending scale, now for any non-musicians that just means notes are going up one after another, long story short in this case, and the sound of the synth used, the music just screams, you are screwed and you're going to die. I found the sound of the weaponry all very fitting, and there's actually a small bit of voiceover in the beginning of Super Metroid saying,
"The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace."
Before finding the Metroid larva and finding out all hell breaks loose and the galaxy is not at peace. Overall, I really enjoyed the music in Super Metroid. It's awe-inspiring when it needs to be, gives an awe-inspiring feeling in some of the new areas, and sometimes can be downright terrifying during Mother Brain or a few of the bosses, and can get a bit scary with sometimes the lack of notes like in the Wrecked Ship. So how about the music in Metroid Dread? The first section of Arteria is a bit reminiscent of landing on Zeebs for the first time, and it gives a sense of, okay, there's some unexpected stuff to come as you make your way to the surface of planet ZDR. Once we get a little deeper into it, the music picks up a little bit, and a little bit of some technology-sounding synth, and it has a slight lead in the music, which does sound like it inspires a feeling of literal dread. Followed once again by the technology-sounding beeps, it's a bit different and probably more in line with something from Metroid Prime. The rest of Arteria is a similar variation of what you've already heard with tempo kicked up just a bit. It's not bad and sort of works in a more subtle way, as part of the track sounds more like sound effects than actual music to me. Kataris. Kataris seems to try to mimic a little bit of Norfair to me. Not to say it's the same track, it's definitely not, and it's definitely got a more sinister vibe than the Norfair depths for being the lava-based environment in this game, with a bit of a quicker tempo, just meaning it's faster here. This track also has the whole dread feeling going on, and I could almost see this music used in a more horror-centric style game, even if that setting were something like hell. Diving deeper into Kataris, it still keeps with a subtle beat and the dread feeling is consistent. It also invokes a feeling to me of being in a factory, along with what I felt was a subtle inspiration from the Norfair depths with some vocal chants thrown in here and there. Frenia's opening somewhat reminds me of Kataris, again with some vocal chants here, and again having a lead that is still thrown at you in a subtle, you're in the presence of alien evil here. Again, something I appreciate about Dread's music is that it feels pretty consistent throughout. Now in Dairon, the Dairon music gets a bit strange, which I appreciate, since to me the nature of Metroid is pretty strange in itself. Some of the subtle leads over the rhythm I could almost picture more in a Resident Evil game, and part of the track gives you a sinking feeling as you hear some of the synth hit some sharp high notes and then trail off. Once again, literal dread vibes. Berenia has that underwater feeling, somewhat similar to Meridia, and it's a great sense of awe and eeriness again here. This is one section where I didn't feel like I really had to dread anything, and it's more mysterious than it is creepy. though it does get a bit weird and strange as the track goes on. Now in Gavoron, we once again go right back to the Dread vibe with an almost espionage-like beat, reminiscent of GoldenEye in the background. This might be one of my more standout tracks in Dread. It's strange, the Dread feeling is totally there, and I appreciate that subtle beat underneath everything else. Now Elun, getting close to the end of Dread, we find ourselves in Elun. This one gets a little slower and a little creepier with some repetitive yet fitting keys and some chorus-sounding synth layered over it all. The repetitive keys, well, to sound repetitive, once again inspire Dread. It's unsettling to say the least, and not something I really want to listen to while not playing the game. Very fitting for the game once again. Hanubia, starting off with a very military-like beat in a minor scale, coming in with some chorus-eerie vocals, you know something big is coming ahead. There's also a really cool bass line in this one that if you're not paying attention to, you might miss that it's even there. Now right before Ravenbeak, we find ourselves in Idorash. It's eerie, it's strange, with a high-pitched sustained note fluctuating in pitch ever so slightly. Almost gave me some Chrono Trigger flashbacks with that sustained note, or kind of like the Joker theme from The Dark Knight. Better get ready for that frantic end battle with Ravenbeak. Now, of course, I don't think we can talk about Metroid Dread's music without talking about Emmy. The little water droplet text sound effect that plays while Emmy searches for you is just unsettling enough for you to keep moving, while the actual search music once Emmy has seen you of course ramps up while the water droplet sound effects continue to play but take on higher pitches and a faster pace. You better be running here. Now off the bat for the boss music again, Dread, Dread, and more Dread. It keeps you on your toes while you keep dying at the bosses, or at least while I kept dying at the bosses. And I stand by appreciating the inclusion of Rookie Mode, but we can talk about difficulty later. The escape music in Dread is much more frantic and complex than Super Metroid, but in that regard it's also less memorable for me. Maybe because the Super Metroid escape music consists of far less notes, it's stuck in my head longer. Overall, I think the music in both games is very fitting. Metroid Dread has a consistent Dread quality to it, and throws in those Metroid Prime-esque sounding technology-inspired sounds. On the other hand, Super Metroid has a lot of variety in its music, going from the introduction of the Ridley theme in Space Colony, to the sinister Dread-like sound of Criteria and its Space Pirates, to Brinstar's groovy track, and so on. For me, Super Metroid has a more varied and just memorable soundtrack. That's not to say Metroid Dread's music is bad, I think it's very fitting. But at the same time, I find the music in Super Metroid to be something on a more special level. Point for music goes to Super Metroid. Alright, so now let's talk about the graphics. This will be pretty short, and I think a no-brainer for most people here, as Super Metroid is a game from 1994 for the Super Nintendo. And of course Metroid Dread, we are looking at the Nintendo Switch. So all those years later, Metroid Dread I think is the pretty obvious winner. The visuals are incredibly crisp and refined, you always have a context of where you are, the environments look clean, and it's a very refreshing sight when Samus moves from the 2D plane to recharge energy, for example, and the camera does an incredibly smooth and cool pan as you're getting a recharge, or an item at a Chozo statue, etc, etc. Love or hate the bosses, the detail on them is great, and I think this is the best Samus has looked in a while. Meanwhile, Super Metroid for its time was great. The art direction I think was honestly phenomenal, but that's the art direction. And Mother Brain, for example, let my imagination as a kid run wild with fear. For anyone that saw that cutscene in Other M, recreating the Mother Brain Metroid larva moment, it's quite something, and if that scene ever gets redone in a remake or a future Metroid Prime, I think this will be the stuff of nightmares for kids growing up these days. Clear winner for graphics here, Metroid Dread. The next one's going to be quick too, and that's Voiceover. Now I could have combined music and voiceover, but I've definitely played games in the past with amazing music and absolutely cheesy voiceover, so I thought it deserved its own category. Now with Metroid Dread, this one does have a bit more voiceover, such as from the robotic voice of Adam, the Chozo quiet robe speaking in Chozo, and the very cool moment of Samus responding in fluent Chozo, along with Ravenbeak toward the end. Though I would say as far as AI voices, I don't think Adam is the best, especially for any Portal fans out there, but it works for the setting at the same time, and the Chozo voices I think are fantastic, so great job to the voice actors here in my book. In Super Metroid, there actually is a few short seconds of voiceover when you're starting a new game. As I mentioned before, telling you the last Metroid is in captivity, the galaxy is at peace. Obviously, this is on a 16-bit cartridge, and for any audiophiles out there, there's a bit of sibilance toward the end to my ears. That is just some harsh S sounds. It's mostly clear, but not very prevalent. Not that more is a good thing, and though I find the robotic Adam voice a bit cheesy, The respective voice actors for Quiet Robe, Samus, and Ravenbeak, I think all fit the bill perfectly, even though it's Chozo they're speaking. Point for voiceover goes to Metroid Dread. Now onto the actual play control of the games. How does Samus control? Is there a steep learning curve to actually moving her around in either game? Well, let's look at Super Metroid first for this one. We're able to jump, dash, and shoot from the get-go, and it all feels pretty good to me. You can shoot while you run and shoot at a 45-degree angle either up or down. You can also do a flip or mini flips in the air if you're running and hit a jump at an angle, and I think it's all pretty natural feeling. The morph ball is great, but you can't jump in morph ball form. You'll have to use your bombs to propel yourself upward. By the end of the game, you'll get the grapple beam, which honestly frustrated me at first. It did eventually click, but it seemed a little awkward at first. Not to mention the section in Meridia where it seemed the hit detection was pretty weak at a grapple point that made for an annoying platforming section. Especially because I'm not really losing any health, it just seemed like cruel and unusual punishment to have me repeatedly try this, and I swear it looks like that grapple beam should be latching onto the beam point, and for whatever reason, it just didn't. There's also the screw attack coupled with the space jump that I also found a bit frustrating, in the sense that it seemed to be based more on timing, and sometimes it seemed to have a mind of its own. I felt I did nothing different in trying to execute jumping around, and for whatever reason on the third jump, it wouldn't let me continue, for example. There was a section in Brinstar as I was making my way back out during the end of the game that I just said screw it, switched to my ice beam, and just froze the enemies to get up higher instead of using my brand new toy with the space jump. That aside, the speed booster worked really well, but I think the big gripe when it comes to play control is the wall jump here. Now this section of the game where these three friendly alien creatures in Brinstar quote-unquote show you the wall jump, it's a little nuts. In any game nowadays where you wall jump, Dread included, you usually hit the A or whatever button as you connect with the wall. In Super Metroid, which I didn't know until this very recent playthrough and figured out by accident, is that you actually turn away from the wall first and then hit A. It's very counterintuitive to me, but once you know that's how it works, it becomes easier as your mind adjusts to it. I think it was also counterintuitive because we had NES games before this where the wall jump was cakewalk. See Ninja Gaiden or Batman. But staying on topic, Super Metroid definitely does not have perfect play control, with a few of the advanced movesets being a little bit wonky in my opinion. Well then, how does the Metroid Dread play control compare? And don't worry, we'll still talk about difficulty, but as far as play control alone with Metroid Dread, honestly, I think Samus controls perfectly. The space jump is incredibly easy to do as many flips as you want when you get it. The wall jump actually makes sense here. Flash shifting back and forth in midair feels just fine, and the morph ball feels as good as it does in any of the Prime games, though I can't say that's much better than Super Metroid, other than having the ability to jump, which isn't necessarily play control as much as it is just something Samus could or couldn't do. The counterattack is also pretty fluid most of the time, though sometimes I felt cheap-shotted out of a counter, especially on the normal mode. If you saw my previous videos, you know I went through both normal and rookie, and there were definite differences between the two. There were a couple of times I thought I hit the flash shift and it didn't execute, but compared to not being able to grapple or space jump as easily in Super Metroid, this was way better as far as play control. There was also being able to control exactly where you were shooting with use of the laser sight, and to me that was all very natural. For its time, Super Metroid I think did have good play control, but it's hard to argue in my book that it didn't have some counterintuitive design. Maybe Nintendo was trying to be different as they so often do. I mean, I'm all for innovation, but sometimes if it ain't broke... Anyway, all that to say, for play control, I'm gonna give this point to Metroid Dread. That puts our running tally at Super Metroid 1, Metroid Dread 3. Okay, now let's talk about the actual level design in the games. The Metroid series for a long time has been known for its exploration, an evolution I think especially prevalent in the Prime series, and in Metroid Prime 3 you're given the entire arsenal, pretty much at the start of the game, flipping the formula on its head and are able to fly your ship to different areas in the galaxy. In Super Metroid, the areas can be large, and though a bit streamlined in the beginning to set the story up and introduce you to the space pirates roaming around Criteria, other areas on planet Zeebs prove to give you many different options as to where you can go. As soon as you get to Brinstar, you realize that not all of these areas are going to be so linear, and that you're going to have many options as where to go next. Even though you'll see the grapple beam points very early on in Brinstar, you won't be getting those until at least a few hours later, unless of course you're a speedrunner, but that's personally not my style, let alone being a completionist, which I most certainly am not. Most of these areas you can take your time in, and many times I felt encouraged by the game's design to explore and seek out more energy tanks and use the X-ray scope to find new areas or hidden items. Meridia, the wrecked ship, and the Norfair depths give you multiple options, with one or two areas that do require a bit faster pacing, say for example as acid rises and you need to space jump your way out, or the escape sequence at the very end of Super Metroid. Now, whereas Super Metroid was a little bit more open, Metroid Dread felt very streamlined in comparison to me. Though there are many collectibles thrown throughout, they mostly felt sort of on the way to the next spot, and if it seemed like there were branching paths, it always felt like if I chose option A where I wasn't supposed to go, the environment would make it so there was actually some sort of wall and gently push me back in the other direction, almost on rails in a sense. And with Emmy and the stalker mechanic, until you beat Emmy, and especially in the beginning, your only option is to run. Though I can appreciate the effort of trying something new, ultimately I want to roam around and learn about the environment, and you can always save running away for an ending escape sequence. Or switch up the formula and have something happen that acts as a halfway point, sort of like some JRPG going from like a light to a dark world at the halfway mark. And I can totally respect your opinion if you did enjoy the Emmy encounters, but at the end of the day, I'm going to personally prefer to roam around and have a feeling of awe as I explore an alien world. I'm giving the point for level design to Super Metroid. Super Metroid 2, Metroid Dread 3. Okay, so how about boss design? Let's start with Super Metroid. Well, Super Metroid's Brinstar boss, the Spore Spawn, is a little bit strange. He starts out moving very slowly, opens up his mouth or whatever, and you're able to get in some hits. As he gets closer and closer to death, he moves a little bit faster, but doesn't prove to be much of a challenge as you wail on him with missiles. Nothing too special here. Well, before Kraid, we have Mini or Fake Kraid, not really a challenge, just kind of a little joke thing thrown in there or something, before we meet the real Kraid. He shoots claws and spikes at you during the fight, and he was pretty fun for me and not too hard if you remember to pick up the Spazer Beam right before him. And actually, I think this last playthrough was the first time I did do that, as I finally knew how to wall jump properly before that. We also have the Chorizos here that are more of a mini-boss, sort of acting like a security unit, and not very threatening, aside from the very last one near Ridley, who catches your super missiles, throws them back at you, and also throws a bunch of projectiles. In Norfair, we fight the Crocomire, an alien dino crocodile-looking alien who pushes toward you, roaring away, and doesn't really do much else than try to push into you and get angry. Not to say it isn't fun, this is an area of the game I actually love as I push him back into the lava and watch his flesh melt violently off of his bones as he crumbles into death. It definitely stands out as a very violent and memorable death scene for me. Hashtag fatality. In the wrecked ship, the formula of fighting the boss at the end of the area is flipped on its head, and you end up fighting him early on to get the power back on. This Phantom boss Phantoon with his leering eyeball is creepy as he swirls around the screen throwing fireballs at you, almost something I'd expect more in a Castlevania game, and I found his patterns predictable and fun in a rather fair boss fight. Later in Meridia, we meet Botwoon. Pretty much a boss from A Link to the Past, honestly, popping his head out of holes in a whack-a-mole style fight as he gets faster and faster paced as he nears death. And it was fun for me to observe where he was coming out of before getting as many hits in as I could. One of the more challenging bosses in the game for me was this guy Dragon, the main baddie in Meridia. This underwater boss tosses many of these floating projectile things toward you while turrets on either side of the screen shoot at you. As is a pattern with these bosses, he will get faster and faster as you take away his health. However, there is a fun little trick to beating Dragon, and that comes in the form of letting him actually carry you away and grappling onto one of the broken turrets to electrocute him, killing him almost instantly. That's all you gotta do, and it is almost as satisfying for me as watching Crocomire's flesh melt off. Ridley you of course fight twice in the game, once at the very beginning as he escapes with the Metroid larva, and there's not much to him. He shoots fire at you from his mouth, swoops around, and eventually just flies away. Round 2 he can be a little more intense, and personally I think he's tougher than Mother Brain, but if you know to just use a Plasma Ice combo, he's gone in about 20 hits instead of unleashing your hundreds of missiles at him. Seriously, I must have fired 100 missiles and he didn't die, and then I used my Plasma Ice Beam combo and he was gone in about 19-20 hits. Though either way is fun, it's definitely going to take you longer with missiles. Now, of course, the main baddie in Super Metroid, Mother Brain, in Turian I think is probably the coolest boss in the game, and rightfully so since she's the main villain here. Just shown as a brain in a glass case at first, you crack open her case, shoot the brain a bunch of times, and it falls. Of course, the sinister music kicks in and she towers above you, drooling away, shooting various beams and weaponry at you from her mouth. And then she goes crazy and fires these explosives at you, and the Metroid larva as it brings you back to health. After you become superpowered, I think it is one of the greatest video game moments in history as you shoot at her and watch her head, brain, face thing violently snap back with each and every shot. It is an extremely satisfying final boss fight for me. Okay, so the bosses in Dread. I have covered them in my previous videos, so to recap, Arteria we have Corpius, and I like the Corpius fight personally. I found it intuitive, clearly shows you a weak spot, gives you the opening to slide underneath him, and executing a counter is fairly simple. It's a fun fight for me personally. Now Kraid we have here in Kataris. On normal mode, I thought Kraid was a very frantic fight, and the excess of claws flying around gave me a bit of a headache. Much fairer on rookie mode, but that didn't exist at the start, so much less fun for me than Corpius was. Next up for bosses, we have the Chozo Soldiers. Most of these guys I found to be a pain, especially the elite Chozo Soldier right before Ravenbeak. Constantly flipping around while I dodge his oil spit breath thing, I did not find nearly entertaining as much as I just wanted it to be over. Drogia and Berenia, as you may know from the Rookie Revisited video I did, is probably my favorite boss in Metroid Dread. I did like the puzzle element of hitting the switches on either side of him, and I found his attack patterns mostly predictable, which I personally prefer in a 2D game such as this. I don't need any rage-inducing bosses stopping me from enjoying the rest of the game. Now Eskew, either normal or rookie mode, I hated him. There is a way you can take massive damage off him with a Shine Spark, but I never could get in many hits before getting massacred by this very annoying bug. Back to Kataris, we've got experiment number Z57, and looking at the standard difficulty, I have no idea how many times I died at him, but it was a lot. I feel like he took one too many hits, but the counter-attack sequence is pretty cool at least. The boss himself graphically looks awesome, but for me this was a rage-inducing I want to throw my controller against the wall style fight. Golzuna in Gavoron, the crab boss, he backed me into the wall multiple times and hammered away. Real fair is all I'm going to say about that. Now, of course, the main baddie in Metroid Dread, Ravenbeak, in Itarash. I have a rash. Once I got the counters down, Ravenbeak I think was probably easier than Z57. Aside from when it gets all Resident Evil and he transforms, I never found him very menacing, and I thought he was honestly less intimidating than most of the other bosses. A good end fight, but nothing compared to Mother Brain in my opinion. Alright, let's consider Emmy for a second. I appreciate them trying something new here, but does a stalker mechanic so prevalent in horror games really belong in a Metroid game? I'd rather spend my time freely exploring personally. Plus, if you're gonna give me a counter, make it possible to actually do that. I did pull it off more in rookie mode anyway. For me, this one is a no-brainer. I just have more fun with the bosses in Super Metroid, and that's why I play games in the first place, is to escape into fantasy for a little while, forget real-life troubles, and just have some fun. If you're more of a leaderboard, I have to be at the top type player, then you might be leaning toward Dread, and that's cool, but yeah. Super Metroid for me for boss design. Running tally here, we have Super Metroid 3, Metroid Dread 3. So how is the overall difficulty between Super Metroid and Metroid Dread? Well, this won't be debated at all in the comments, right? The bosses in Super Metroid are notably easier, and personally I found them more fun, and oftentimes cooler to look at in my honest opinion, despite it being a game from 1994. Sometimes art direction goes a long way, I guess. There were parts of Dread that did annoy me platforming wise a little bit with the disappearing mushrooms and Gavoron, but other than that, the platforming in between bosses was never super challenging, and I found it mostly easy to get around the different levels from point A to point B. Super Metroid's platforming is also very easy for the most part, with a couple of play control issues on the grapple beam and space jump, making a couple sections also a little bit annoying, but these things honestly took me way less tries than the section in Dread, giving me a headache. Emmy could also be a real headache in Dread, and I would have had more fun, or fun at all at certain times in those sections, had I been able to actually counter Emmy. For me, it always seemed near impossible. Difficulty shouldn't necessarily define the fun you'll have in a game, but I think it can certainly stop something that should be a lot of fun from being fun at all, at least in spots. At least they added Rookie, but if you caught my previous video, I found some things to feel exactly the same. The difficulty in Super Metroid I think was more than fair, and the overall difficulty in Metroid Dread was imbalanced, mostly fun platforming, and mostly frustrating boss fights for me. Point for difficulty is gonna go to Super Metroid. Running tally here, Super Metroid 4, Metroid Dread 3. Now as far as the presentation, I'm going to look at these side by side. Where Super Metroid starts you off in an overrun space colony and just as you go, Metroid Dread has a very nice tutorial showing you all of the abilities you have and how to use them, with enemies serving as context, say if you're going to counter one of them. Both games get you going pretty quickly, but Dread holds your hand a bit more. The map in Super Metroid will get you by, but it's very bare bones in comparison to Dread's map, where you can see any area you've been to, and see what barrier might be blocking your path, such as speed booster or screw attack blocks. Both games also had a Samus screen showing you all your power-ups, but in Super Metroid this boiled down to being able to toggle your power-ups on and off. In Dread, you could actually watch a mini tutorial video serving as a gentle reminder of how to do something, which proved useful to me when I totally forgot you can flash shift back and forth in midair, not just in one direction. A useful strategy in fighting some of the bosses. The save rooms are about the same, an evolution from 1994 to 2022, and I feel about the same on both of them. It's not very surprising that Dread has an overall cleaner feel to it given the massive generations apart, but of course also inspired and maybe an evolution from all of the Metroids before it, giving the point for presentation to Metroid Dread. Super Metroid 4, Metroid Dread 4. So how about the actual weapons and movesets between the two games? Metroid Dread has some pretty cool abilities such as flash shifting and cloaking, and it was certainly easier to execute the space jump. The grapple beam made a return not just for grappling around, but for actually pulling certain doors open. Being able to aim with a laser sight and counter, when you could counter, felt good, but most of the weaponry honestly felt about the same to me. The Omega Cannon was all nice and fun when you had it for such a limited time, but it was such a limited time in a possibly frustrating section for many people that I'd be more inclined to think about Prime's Phazon Cannon. But sticking to Dread and Super Metroid's grapple beam was intact and a bit clunkier to me. But having played them so close together, I thought most of the weapons felt honestly about the same. Storm missiles are kind of cool, but you get them closer to the end, and the missiles and super missiles in both again just feel about the same, along with the X-ray scope of Super Metroid and the pulse radar of Metroid Dread, pretty much the same concept. However, because the grapple beam was so much smoother to me, and flash shift I think should be in every 2D Metroid game moving forward if and when we get more of these, I'm giving this point just ever so slightly to Metroid Dread. Running tally here of Super Metroid 4, Metroid Dread 5. So it's been pretty close so far with just a few topics left. I hope you've been enjoying this content as much as I had fun making it. Let me know if you'd like more of these showdown style videos. They definitely take time to do, but they are fun putting together, just seeing what everybody likes out there, and help out the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing. And to get back to it, we are going to go into replay value. So now we're neck and neck about with Dread edging out Super Metroid. Who is going to win? On to replay value. I think this will be heavily debated in the comments, maybe, we'll see, but this is my take on it. I'm in the camp, as you know, as if you've seen the other videos, of thinking the standard difficulty was too difficult. I most certainly did not enjoy fighting some of the bosses, and I had the legitimate thought of, I think I'd be having more fun working right now. Not really a thought I want to have when playing a game. Now, of course, because there was such a ruckus on difficulty for many players, the developers updated the game with the Rookie and Dread DLC. They did get me to play again, but I found SQ especially equally as tough on Rookie mode, though overall I had an easier time with it. There is hard mode, which maybe I would do if just for the sake of a video for my honest take on hard mode or something like that, but other than that, I'd be way more inclined to play Super Metroid again. The wider open areas make for a more roam-around adventure as opposed to the streamlined point A to point B of Dread, and I won't mind fighting the bosses again along the way, and I feel way more accomplished in the end of it. Not to mention, I think Mother Brain is probably one of the coolest end bosses ever, and Ravenbeak is pretty weak in comparison, or anticlimactic at least. And the ending transformation is more Resident Evil than Metroid to me, but I think Mother Brain would destroy Ravenbeak personally. Now, if you're someone who craves that challenge, I could totally see why you would say Dread, but obviously this is all my opinion, as are all reviews and these kinds of videos if we're being honest, but I said what I said. So, replay value for me goes to Super Metroid. Running tally here, Super Metroid 5, Metroid Dread 5. Finally, the overall gameplay between the games. The platforming in both is about equal. As I mentioned before, the grapple beam in Super I found a bit annoying at first until it clicked, and there's a platforming section in Dread I just find a bit unnecessary. Though the play control, as I stated in that section, I would give to Dread, it doesn't break Super Metroid having a bit of a counterintuitive design on the wall jump, for example. I personally found the bosses frustrating overall in Metroid Dread, and I find them fun in Super Metroid. I don't always mind a linear game. Super Mario Bros. Will forever remain a classic, for example, or the Donkey Kong Country series on Super Nintendo, or how about Bonk? Seriously, I just wanted to throw a Bonk reference in here for anyone that had a TurboGrafx 16, or if I just sent a bunch of younger people on a wild goose chase to look up what a TurboGrafx is, that would be awesome. But in any case, if it says Metroid on the cover, I'd like to explore a little bit more. Not that I mind the hand-holding tutorial sections, as I think some games need a little bit more of that actually. If anyone here has played Subnautica, which I thought, cool, it's like Metroid Prime but underwater, that game throws you in and tells you pretty much nothing, but all that to say is I want the freedom. I don't want to be worried about something chasing me out of an area. The bosses are fun in Super Metroid, the areas can be very open in comparison to Dread, and Mother Brain just crushes Ravenbeak in every possible way for me. I'm giving gameplay to Super Metroid. Running tally, Super Metroid 6, Metroid Dread 5. And I thought about adding a category of how the game made me feel by the end of it, but since that's not really a standard thing, I'm not going to really count that toward the tally. But just to briefly comment on the idea, by the end of Metroid Dread the first time, I had a feeling of, well, I'm never doing that again attitude toward it, which is unfortunate because of the smooth controls of Samus. Of course, Rookie Mode got me to play again, and if I do hard, it'll only be for the sake of the video, honestly. And by the end of Super Metroid, I felt like I had really accomplished something, that I had restored peace to the galaxy and survived a wild adventure in finding the Metroid larva, defeating Ridley and the rest of the bosses, obliterating Mother Brain, and witnessing that emotional scene between the Metroid and Samus of the not-so-little larva saving Samus's life. Super Metroid actually made me feel something, whereas Dread frustrated me just way too many times to count. So there you have it. Those are all my categories: Super Metroid 6, Metroid Dread 5. If you stayed until the end, thank you so much, that means a lot, I sincerely appreciate it, and let me know how you feel about my thoughts. Do you think the wider open areas of Super Metroid reign supreme over Dread, or do the frantic boss fights and enemy encounters of Metroid Dread give you a dose of suspense versus frustration? I would love to hear what you think in the comments below, or what you might like to see in future 2D Metroid titles or future Metroid Prime titles, and don't forget to help out the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye everybody!